Stephen Curry, 4 NBA championships, 2 MVP titles, 1 Finals MVP, and nearly 2 decades turning shots once considered crazy into a part of modern basketball. A living icon who has redefined distance on the court, from a small guard who was doubted to the one who forced the entire NBA to change the way it defends. He conquered the world's harshest stage with skill, discipline, and an unyielding will. Millions admire Curry for those three-pointers that seem to have no limits, and the joy he brings every time he steps onto the court. But behind that glory is a story that is not glamorous, but painful. A body once considered too small, a right ankle that continuously betrayed him, times of returning only to have to stop again, and the uncertainty that that extraordinary talent might never be fully seen if his body could not endure the NBA long enough. There is a nearly ruthless paradox in Stephen Curry's story. The man who later made defenders step out nearly 30 feet to stop him once only tried to do something far simpler: put his feet on the floor, keep his balance, run, stop and change direction without another injury. In the recovery rooms of the early years of his career, there were no cheers, no championship parade, no shots from the logo. Only a still very young Curry, the treatment table, resistance bands, those small repetitive movements, and a future no one could guarantee. In the 2011-12 season, he appeared in only 26 games. While a young player was supposed to accumulate experience and build his standing, Curry had to spend too much time trying to regain trust in his own body. No one needed to say that his career was about to end. The uncertainty was already frightening enough. His talent was real, but whether those feet could keep him on the court long enough for that talent to become history still had no answer. Before Curry changed the distance of basketball, he had to relearn how to stand firmly on the court. So how could a player who once had to fight just to run and change direction normally make the entire NBA change? And what did he have to pay to do that? Before continuing into Stephen Curry's journey, please hit like and leave a heart symbol as a sign of respect for the one who once had to fight just to stand firmly on the court before making the entire NBA change. I'll mention this just once. I've gathered these unforgettable sports stories, trivia, and memories into a book called The Golden Age of Sports Trivia for Seniors. If it sounds like something you'd enjoy, the link is in the comments. And before the ankles became a threat to his career, Stephen Curry had to overcome another pain: not being believed that his body was good enough to step onto the big stage. In his final years at Charlotte Christian, Curry already knew basketball was the path he wanted to pursue. He had skill, had a special shot, and carried a last name familiar to the NBA. His father, Del Curry, had played many years in the world's toughest league, so Stephen clearly understood what the life of a professional player looked like. But the name Curry could not help him grow taller, heavier, or make the big college programs look at that slender body with a different eye. They saw the shooting ability. They knew he had talent. But they also saw a small guard, developing physically slower than many other prospects, and most were not ready to put a scholarship on his future. The painful thing was not that no one knew who Stephen Curry was. They saw him and still chose someone else. Nowhere made that feeling clearer than Virginia Tech, the school connected to the Curry family and the place Stephen once hoped to play. Del and Sonia both attended there, but the door for their son did not open the way Stephen hoped. Instead of a scholarship showing clear trust, his opportunity mainly lay in the walk-on direction. Not a complete rejection, but also not an affirmation that the program was ready to bet on him, and sometimes that is the hardest kind of rejection to swallow. People see what you have, but still do not believe it is enough. While the big programs turned toward taller, stronger, and higher-rated players, Curry had to choose between trying to step into a place that did not really believe in him and finding a smaller path. Then Davidson appeared. Bob McKillop and that program could not give Curry the glory of the ACC, but they could give him what he needed more: a scholarship, opportunity, and belief. It was still a gamble. A small school could help Curry mature, but could also make a player who was already little noticed even farther from the eyes of the entire country. No promise of the NBA, no guarantee that America would know his name. Only a small program ready to bet on a small guard that the bigger places had overlooked. Stephen Curry chose Davidson. They opened a door for him, and at that time, no one knew the young man walking through that door would then make all of America have to look again. Davidson opened the door for Stephen Curry, but walking through that door did not mean he immediately proved all those who had doubted him wrong. Right in his first college game, Curry committed 13 turnovers, 13 times losing the ball. For a small guard just stepping into a small program, after many years not being bet on by the big schools, that was not the start of a fairy tale. It was like a cold reminder that talent was still not enough. The game speed was faster, the spaces smaller, every wrong decision was punished, and if Davidson only needed a reason to doubt its investment, Curry had just given them many. But Bob McKillop did not pull him off that path. He continued to give Curry playing minutes, continued to put the ball in his hands, and more importantly, gave him the right to make mistakes without being defined by those mistakes. For the first time in his journey, Curry did not need to be perfect to be trusted. He only needed to prove that he could learn, and he learned very quickly. Week by week, the haste decreased, scoring increased, the shot became more and more consistent, and his movement began to force the smaller defenses in the Southern Conference to change the way they guarded him. In his freshman season, Curry averaged 21.5 points per game. That number not only turned him into a notable scorer, it turned him into the center of Davidson, a program that had no advantage in size or name, but now possessed a guard who could change the game with just a few hot minutes. Into his sophomore season, Curry was stronger, more confident, and more dangerous. He was no longer just the small guy that Davidson gave a chance. He had become the player every opponent had to plan to stop. But outside the scope of college basketball, he was still not a national star. Davidson was still Davidson, a small program. A name easy to skip over among the Dukes, North Carolinas, Kansases, Georgetowns, and the familiar powers of March. Then March of 2008 arrived, and in just a few days, everything began to change. In the first round of the NCAA tournament, Davidson faced Gonzaga. Curry stepped into that game with millions of viewers who had never really watched him play, and stepped out with 40 points. Not just the total points. It was the way he scored them. The shots came fast, from strange angles, sometimes farther than what viewers were used to seeing a college guard dare to try. A slender body among larger players, but not playing as if he needed to ask permission to exist on that stage. America began to pay attention, but one explosive game could still be called a surprise. So Curry had to do it again. In the next round, Davidson faced Georgetown, the number 2 seed, a program with reputation, size, and strength far beyond what Curry's small team possessed on paper. Curry scored 30 points. Davidson won. At this point, the story was no longer easy to dismiss. People began to ask not how lucky Davidson was, but who Stephen Curry really was. To the Sweet 16 against Wisconsin, the pressure had changed. Curry no longer appeared as a secret. Defenses knew his name, knew his shot, knew where Davidson wanted to get the ball, and he still scored 33 points. Davidson advanced to the Elite Eight. In just 1 week, Curry had gone from a star of a small program to the face all of America waited to watch every night. The long shots made the audience jump up. The off-ball runs made the cameras have to find him. A player that many big schools had not been ready to give a scholarship to now stood in the middle of March Madness and forced the most prestigious programs to rotate their entire defensive plan around him. But the story did not end in glory. In the Elite Eight, Davidson faced Kansas, the number 1 seed and the team that would later become the national champion. The game stretched in tension, each possession as heavy as stone. Curry scored 25 points, but Kansas did not leave him free in the final moments. Davidson had a chance to survive until the last seconds, then the whistle sounded with the score 59-57. 2 points, only 2 points between Curry and the Final Four. After all the cheers, the shots that stunned America, he had to stand there watching another team move on. That was the bitter paradox of March Madness 2008. Curry came to the tournament wanting to win. He left it with something he had never asked for but had pursued for many years: recognition. America finally saw him right when he had to swallow one of the most painful defeats of his youth. But instead of letting that tournament become the only peak, Curry returned to Davidson and in his junior season averaged 28.6 points per game, leading Division I in scoring. The March weeks were not a fleeting miracle. The shot was real. The scoring ability was real. The confidence was real. College basketball could no longer ask whether Stephen Curry was good enough. He had answered that question in front of millions of people. But a bigger door was waiting, and behind it was a more ruthless standard. The NBA no longer asked whether Curry could dominate college. They asked whether a body as small as that, a style depending on skill and distance like that, could still survive when every defender was faster, stronger, and longer than what he had ever faced. And when college basketball finally could no longer doubt Stephen Curry, a harsher world began to pose new questions. Before the NBA draft of 2009, no one still debated whether Curry could score or not. March Madness had shown what he could do under pressure. The junior season had proven that was not a few random explosive weeks. The name was there, the shots were there, but the NBA does not draft beautiful memories. The NBA drafts what they believe can exist against larger, faster, and stronger bodies. And with Curry, the problem now was no longer talent. The problem was where that talent belonged. If he was a shooting guard, he was too small to go against taller and stronger players at the two position. If he was a point guard, the scouts had to ask themselves whether a scorer already used to carrying the offense at Davidson had enough ability to run an entire NBA offense, read the defense, create opportunities for teammates, and live with the responsibility of the primary ball handler. And even if everything on the offensive end of the court could shift, another question still waited for him at the other end. How would Stephen Curry defend against guards with the speed, strength, and athleticism that the Southern Conference could not simulate? That was the difference between the doubts when he left high school and the doubts before the draft. The day before, the schools asked themselves whether Curry deserved to be given a chance. Now, everyone already knew he was special. They just did not know whether that specialness had a clear position in the NBA. In June of 2009, Curry sat waiting in a night where the future could change direction with just one name being read out. Minnesota owned 2 consecutive picks at the number 5 and number 6 positions. They chose Ricky Rubio, then Johnny Flynn. Looking back from many years later, that moment seems hard to believe. But that is exactly what needs to be remembered. The Stephen Curry of the future did not yet exist in the eyes of the NBA in 2009. There were no 4 championships to prove them wrong. No MVP, no three-point record. Only a small guard with extraordinary skill and enough questions to let 6 picks pass by before the Golden State Warriors called his name at the number 7 position. And Golden State at that time was also not a winning paradise waiting for Curry to appear. The Warriors were an organization that for many years struggled with instability, changing direction, and did not yet have a strong enough identity to make any rookie feel he had just stepped into a dynasty. Curry arrived at a franchise searching for answers, while he himself was still being asked what he truly was. But then the rookie season began, and little by little, the questions about basketball started to fade. Curry played 80 games. He showed that his shot did not disappear when the three-point line was farther out. He proved that his scoring ability could hold up against NBA defenders. More importantly, his playmaking developed. He no longer just waited for shooting opportunities. He began controlling the tempo, reading the pick and roll, finding teammates, and showing that he could live with the ball in his hands more than some people had ever believed. By the end of the season, Curry finished second in the Rookie of the Year voting. For a player who had once had to find a small school just to be given a chance, that was an almost perfect response. He had stepped into the NBA and had not disappeared. He belonged here. At the very least, that question began to have an answer. But sometimes, just when a person overcomes one doubt, life simply replaces it with another that hurts more. Curry had started proving that his skill was enough for the NBA. He did not yet know that the biggest problem ahead would not lie in his shot, his passing ability, or his position on the floor. it would lie much lower. In a play that seemed ordinary, his foot planted on the court, his body changed direction, and his ankle folded. At that moment, it could still be seen as a routine sports injury. A rolled ankle, a short break, then a return. But Curry did not yet know that the very place where he had just put his entire body weight down would soon become the place that made his NBA future more fragile than any scouting report ever could. At first, it was only a rolled ankle, a familiar situation in the NBA, where feet constantly collide and landings off by just a few centimeters are enough to stop a player in his tracks. But then it happened again and again. For Stephen Curry, the problem in his right ankle quickly crossed the line of an ordinary injury. In the 2010-11 season, the sprains began appearing often enough to disrupt the rhythm of a young guard trying to build his place in the league. For Curry, the ankle was not just a small joint at the end of the foot. It was the connection point for almost everything that made up his game: accelerating, decelerating, changing direction, cutting through screens, stopping, and then rising up to shoot. As soon as that foundation became unstable, all the skills above it also became fragile. He could possess an exceptional shot, but a shot meant nothing if his feet could not get him to the right spot to take it. By May of 2011, the problem could no longer be solved with tape, a few games of rest and a return. Curry had to undergo surgery to repair the damaged ligaments in his right ankle. That was the first turning point, because from that moment on, the injury was no longer a side incident in his career. It had become part of the career itself. Curry was still very young. He had just had a promising rookie season. He had started proving the doubters wrong. But now, instead of entering the off-season with the question of how to become a better point guard, he had to spend time recovering an ankle damaged enough to require surgery. And recovery in professional sports always carries its own kind of ruthlessness. You can complete every exercise. You can regain strength. You can hear the doctors say that everything is progressing in the right direction. But no test is completely like the moment a defender charges into you. Your body has to change direction in less than a second, and then the entire weight drops onto the foot that has just been repaired. Curry returned hoping that the worst part was behind him, but then the ankle folded again. He rested, he recovered, he came back, and it happened again. Each time, the question kept changing. At first it was how long he would be out, then it was when he would return. Then gradually, the more frightening question appeared. If this ankle kept going like this, how could Stephen Curry build a stable NBA career? The 2011-12 season became the most painful answer to that worry. Curry played only 26 games. 26. For a young player, that was not simply missing most of a season. That was missing the games needed to learn how to read defenses, build chemistry with teammates, handle late-game pressure, understand his body, and mature in a league where every year a new wave of talent enters. While other players accumulated thousands of minutes, Curry spent too much time trying to get back to the state that a healthy player usually considers the starting point. He no longer had to prove that he knew how to shoot. No one really doubted that anymore. The problem was availability. His talent could be enormous, but if his body only allowed him to appear in stretches, what were the Warriors supposed to build their future around? That uncertainty became clearest when Golden State decided to extend Curry's contract in 2012, 4 years worth about $44 million. Looking from the future, that number is almost unbelievable. One of the greatest players of his generation, a man who would later change the economics of the franchise and win multiple championships, was locked in at a price that would later be seen as one of the most valuable contracts in team history. But at the time of the signing, the Warriors did not possess knowledge of the future. They did not know MVPs were coming. They did not know championships were coming. They did not know those ankles would stabilize long enough for Curry to become the center of a dynasty. They were betting on talent while accepting the risk of the body. Curry himself was also living between two very different worlds. Inside the NBA, his future was full of questions. Outside the court, life was moving into a new phase. In 2011, he married Aisha, who had known him before the titles, the endorsements, and the spotlight turned the name Curry into a global brand. In 2012, their first daughter Riley was born. His private life was expanding at the exact moment his professional career had never been more fragile. That did not make the ankle stronger. Family was not a magical cure for injury, but it gave the uncertainty a different weight. Curry was no longer just a young player trying to prove he belonged in the NBA. He was becoming a husband, a father, while the very profession he had spent his whole life pursuing still had not given him the certainty that his body would cooperate. And perhaps that was the most painful part of those years. Curry had done so many things right. He had overcome being overlooked by the big schools. He had taken Davidson to the brink of the Final Four. He had been drafted. He had played 80 games as a rookie. He had shown that his skill belonged in the NBA. But now, everything was placed in the hands of something he could not simply control by will. He could train, he could recover, he could come back. But no one could guarantee the ankle would not fold again. The years from 2010 to 2012 were therefore not just a string of injuries. They turned Stephen Curry's career into a gamble. Each time he returned, hope was built up again. Each time he went down, the future was pulled back into darkness. And after the surgery, the therapy, the stretches of rest and return, one truth began to emerge. Perhaps simply fixing the ankle had never been enough. Perhaps the problem was not in one damaged joint, but in the way Curry's entire body was demanding that joint do too much. Perhaps the problem was not only in the ankle, and that was when Stephen Curry and the Golden State staff began looking at his body in a different way. If a small joint at the end of the foot had to carry too much responsibility every time Curry accelerated, stopped suddenly, changed direction or landed, the solution could not be only to make the ankle stronger and then hope it would not fold again. The entire way his body created force, maintained balance and absorbed force had to be rebuilt from the foundation. Kiki Lyles and the Warriors' performance staff focused on the parts the audience almost never noticed when Curry played: the hips, the glutes, the core, and the posterior chain. The idea was very clear. Instead of letting the already damaged ankle carry most of the job of stabilizing the body, the larger muscle groups had to start sharing the work. Curry had to relearn how to stop after high speed, how to change direction, how to keep his axis on contact, and how to control his body when only one foot was on the floor. One of the exercises that became a symbol of that process was called the 747. Curry stood on one leg, hinged from the hips, opened his body, and tried to keep the entire axis stable. From the outside, it looked almost too simple for an NBA player. But for Curry, it touched exactly the place where his career had once been most fragile. At first, the body was not as stable as hoped. He had to learn how to keep the hips in position, how the core controlled the torso, and how the larger muscle groups reacted before all the pressure dropped onto the ankle. Over time, the difference became clear. The body was not only stronger, it began to operate differently. There was an almost perfect paradox in that story. The man who would later make the best defenders in the world lose their balance had to spend countless hours learning how not to lose his own balance. But balance was only one part. Curry also built strength in a way that fit poorly with the image of the small shooter the public usually saw. He could once perform a trap bar deadlift of about 400 pounds, a notable number for his frame. But the goal was not to turn Curry into a massive player. This was functional strength. He needed strength to decelerate without collapsing his axis, change direction without forcing the ankle to take all the force, absorb contact, land stably, and maintain posture when the body was already tired. That was especially important because Curry's shot had never started only from the wrist. It started from the ground. The feet created the base, the hips transferred force, the core held the axis, and then the arms completed the motion. If the lower body lost stability, the mechanics above could also be affected. Therefore, endurance became another part of the rebuild. Curry did not only need to be strong for one change of direction, he had to be durable enough to repeat it dozens of times in a game. Later, people would see him pass the ball and immediately run, cut along the baseline, loop around a screen, change direction, and appear on the other side of the floor before the defense could rest. But that kind of movement only existed if the body could withstand it. Conditioning with Curry was therefore not simply fitness. It became part of the offensive skill. If he stopped running, the defense got to rest. If he kept moving, they had to keep chasing. And behind all of it were still the repetitions with the basketball. Thousands of shots, from many spots, after dribbles, after movement, when the legs were still fresh and when the body was already tired. The audience saw Curry's wrist snap and the ball fly into the basket. They did not see the feet, the hips, the core, and the balance that had to get him to the exact spot before that moment. What made Curry special had never lain only in his hands. It lay in the entire body being trained to serve that shot, over and over again. And that process did not cure Curry in the sense of making him immune to injury. The ankles could still have problems. In later years, he would still face other injuries. The NBA does not give any body a guarantee. What Curry and the Warriors achieved was more practical. Reduce the dependence on the weak point, build additional strength around it, and create a body better able to withstand the demands of the way he played. What began as an effort to save a career gradually created a different Stephen Curry, stronger in the places the audience could not see, more stable in the movements that had once brought him down, and durable enough to sustain a style based on almost non-stop movement. Curry had not yet changed the NBA at that point. There was no Dynasty yet, no 73 wins, no 402 threes. But for the first time, he had a physical foundation solid enough to keep his talent on the floor. And before long, the question would no longer be whether Stephen Curry's body could handle the NBA. The question would be what the NBA had to do to handle Stephen Curry. In the early years, Stephen Curry had to fight just to keep himself on the floor. But as his body began to stabilize more, the problem changed completely. The question was no longer whether Curry could survive in the NBA. The question was what the NBA had to do to stop him from surviving inside its own defensive structure. In the 2012-13 season, Curry made 272 three-pointers, setting the NBA record at the time. 2 years later, the number rose to 286. Then in the 2015-16 season, it exploded to 402. 402 three-pointers in a single season. Those numbers were not just records. They showed the gap between what basketball once thought a shooter should do and what Curry began making everyone regard as normal. But it is necessary to understand exactly what happened. Stephen Curry did not invent the three-point shot. Reggie Miller had turned it into a weapon years earlier. Ray Allen had taken shooting to a different standard. Analytics had also gradually made NBA teams understand the value of the three and of space. Curry did not create that revolution alone. What he did was become the strongest evidence that a championship-caliber offense could be built around range, movement, and shooting on a scale that no one had previously dared place at the center of an entire system. The 2014-15 season was the first confirmation. Curry won MVP. Golden State won the championship. That was the moment the league could no longer continue viewing the Warriors as an interesting experiment. They had won by playing that way. And what made Curry dangerous was not only the shooting percentage, it was where he could shoot from and the moments when he could shoot. When a defender knew Curry could pull up from very deep, the safe distance disappeared. Defenders had to step up higher. If they sagged under the screen, Curry could stop and shoot. If the big man stayed deep near the basket, Curry had space. If the big man stepped up, the space behind opened up for cutters, rollers, and other passes. Just one player could pull the defense out of where it wanted to stand. And even after the ball left Curry's hands, the pressure still did not end. He passed and then ran, cut along the baseline, curled around a screen, changed direction, used another screen. The defense had to keep following him because a single second of lost focus could create enough space for a shot to appear. This is when the word gravity became the most fitting way to describe Curry's influence. A player once viewed as too small now generated tactical pull strong enough to make an entire defense shift according to his position. There were possessions where Curry did not score, did not even touch the ball last. yet simply the fact that two defenders had to watch him created space for others. That is why his impact cannot be measured only by the number of threes. He changed the shape of the court in the eyes of the defense. Then the 2015-16 season pushed everything to a level that felt almost unreal. Golden State won 73 regular season games, breaking the 72-win record of the Chicago Bulls from 1995-96. Curry averaged 30.1 points per game, led the NBA in scoring, made 402 threes, and became the first unanimous MVP in the history of the league. A player who once had to listen to people question whether his body was big enough to be given a scholarship had become the player no MVP ballot could oppose. The Warriors did not just win, they made basketball look different. Shots from distances that once made coaches furious now appeared as reasonable choices when the ball was in Curry's hands. But just as that season approached the image of perfection, it ended in a defeat so painful that no previous achievement could cover it. The Warriors entered the 2016 NBA Finals against the Cleveland Cavaliers and led the series 3-1. Just one more win, one game to complete 73-9 with a championship. One game to turn the greatest regular season in history into one of the most complete seasons basketball had ever seen. But that win did not come. Cleveland won Game 5, then Game 6, and everything returned to Oakland for Game 7. Curry and the Warriors had home court, a historic season behind them, and the chance to stamp a year that had almost never existed. But when the final buzzer sounded, Cleveland was the team left standing with the championship. The Warriors had led 3-1 and then lost 3 straight. The 73-win season did not disappear. The 402 threes did not disappear. The unanimous MVP did not disappear. But from then on, all of it had to live alongside one of the most famous collapses in NBA Finals history. That is a particular pain of greatness. When you come that close to perfection, the final failure becomes larger than normal. Curry had changed the way the league looked at shooting, but even he could not shoot himself out of every defeat. The following summer, Kevin Durant joined Golden State. The Warriors returned to the finals and won the championship in 2017, then did it again in 2018. There is no need to turn this period into a debate over who mattered more than whom. What matters for this story is that the revolution had become a dynasty. Curry, Durant, Klay Thompson, Draymond Green, and the rest of the Warriors made a style once considered too dependent on shooting the center of power in the NBA. Opponents no longer asked whether Golden State's way of playing worked. They had to find a way to survive it. And from 2015 to 2019, the Warriors reached the NBA Finals 5 seasons in a row. By the record, it was a dynasty. By history, it was one of the most memorable periods of dominance in modern basketball. But for the human body, 5 such long seasons are measured by a different kind of number. The number of games, the number of overnight flights, the number of collisions, the number of accelerations and decelerations, and the number of recovery days that grew fewer and fewer. Championship trophies count the number of titles. The body counts everything differently: the number of games played, the number of overnight flights, the number of collisions, the number of accelerations then decelerations, the number of direction changes in tight spaces, and the number of recovery days that grew fewer and fewer as the season stretched all the way into June. For Stephen Curry, that was the quiet price of a dynasty built on almost non-stop movement. It cannot be said that 5 consecutive finals appearances directly caused every injury afterward. Basketball is not that simple. But accumulated workload is a part of the context that cannot be ignored, especially for a player for whom every possession demanded that the feet, hips, core, and entire nervous system operate continuously at high speed. Even in the 2016 playoffs, Curry had already gone through ankle issues and then knee issues. But that was only the first reminder that a body that had been rebuilt did not mean that body was immune to time and contact. By the 2017-18 season, the ankle problem returned. Then came a Grade 2 MCL sprain in the left knee. Curry played only 51 regular season games. Once again, he had to face what had haunted the early years. The talent was still there, But the schedule never cared whether you were the MVP or how many rehabs you had already survived. Rebuilding the body had helped Curry survive and develop. It could not make him invulnerable. And by 2019, the price of the dynasty began to appear not only on Curry's body, but on those who had built it with him. Kevin Durant tore his Achilles in the NBA Finals. Klay Thompson tore his ACL. Golden State lost the championship. In just a few days, the team that had looked almost immortal had to watch two pillars fall with serious injuries. Curry could not make those injuries his own, but he had to stand inside the same system and watch the structure that had taken the Warriors to 5 consecutive finals begin to break apart piece by piece. Then a few months later, that collapse reached him. At the start of the 2019-20 season, Curry broke his left hand, needed surgery, and ultimately appeared in only 5 games. The contrast was almost cruel, from 5 consecutive seasons reaching the finals to a season in which Curry nearly vanished from the floor. Golden State fell from a symbol of stability and dominance to the bottom so quickly that people almost did not have time to understand what had happened. But Curry still returned. In the 2020-21 season, at age 33, he averaged 32 points per game and won the scoring title. A version that seemed to have already passed its peak was playing the best offensive basketball of his career. But even that was not enough to get the Warriors back to the playoffs. This was a different kind of pain. Curry could prove he was still extraordinary, still capable of doing things that seemed to belong to youth. But basketball is a team sport. One person can pull an entire system a long way, but cannot pull it back to the past by will alone. And then 2022 arrived. Right before the playoffs, a sprained ligament in the left foot again raised the familiar question. There was no need to return to all the rehab rooms of a decade earlier to understand how much weight that feeling carried. The body once again appeared exactly when the greatest opportunity was opening. But this time Curry returned in time. The Warriors advanced through the playoffs, and then met the Boston Celtics in the NBA Finals. After 3 games, Golden State trailed 2-1. Game 4 took place in Boston, in an atmosphere where one more loss could make the entire series slip away. Curry scored 43 points. 43, not in a December regular season game, but on the night when the old dynasty was forced to prove it was still alive. The man who had once played only 26 games because of his ankles, the man who had once had to relearn how to keep his balance, now stood in the middle of Boston and pulled the Warriors back with the very feat that had once made his future a gamble. Golden State won the series. Curry won his first Finals MVP. But the value of that moment did not lie only in a missing title on the resume. It lay in the fact that a team that had lost Durant, lost Thompson for a long time, lost Curry himself to a hand injury, then fallen to the bottom, still found a way back. And Curry was the center of that resurrection. If the story ended there, it would be too beautiful. But the body does not read the script. Time does not stop for a trophy. In the seasons that followed, Curry continued to go through periods of having to sit out because of various issues. By the 2025 playoffs, a hamstring strain again forced him out of the rhythm of play at a critical moment. Into 2026, a problem in the right knee forced him to rest longer and return with a more careful approach to managing workload. This is not a sign of someone simply growing weaker. This is the reality of a guard entering the end of his 30s, after nearly 2 decades relying on a style that demanded the body continuously run, stop, change direction, and create pressure through movement. What is notable is that Curry's life had also changed completely in that span of time. In the early years, he and Ayesha were only just building their marriage. Riley was still small, and the professional future was not yet stable. Now the family has 4 children. Ayesha has built her own career. Curry is no longer only a young player trying to prove he belongs in the NBA. He is a husband, a father, a symbol of Golden State, and the face around which an entire franchise has revolved for more than a decade. Faith and family do not heal a hamstring, do not make a knee young again, and do not erase the times the body had to stop, but they create a place of stability outside the court. A part of life not measured by shooting percentage or number of wins. And perhaps it is here that Curry's story becomes more painful when looking back. In his 20s, he had to prove that that small body was good enough to play in the NBA. By the end of his 30s, he again has to prove something else, that the body that carried him through championships, MVPs, and a tactical revolution is still strong enough to continue carrying the role that the Warriors have depended on for more than 10 years. The question about the body never truly disappeared. It only changed shape. Before, people asked, can this body survive in the NBA? Now the question is much more painful. How much longer can this body continue to carry what it itself has built? Now look at a modern basketball game without Stephen Curry appearing on the floor. A point guard crosses half court and pulls up from a distance once considered too far. A center stands outside the three-point line instead of waiting for the ball under the basket. 5 players stretch the floor. The defense begins applying pressure very early. In the stands, children imitate the release, the way of turning to celebrate, and the shots from distances that a generation earlier might have gotten a player pulled immediately by the coach. How many of those images still look strange to a viewer in 2026? Perhaps very few. And that is part of Stephen Curry's legacy. He did not create every element of modern basketball. He did not invent the three-point shot, did not single-handedly create analytics, was not the first to pull big men out of the paint. But the success of Curry and Golden State helped turn ideas once considered extreme into something normal, reasonable, even expected. A generation growing up after Curry may look at the distance and think it is only skill. They may imitate the celebration, the release, the pull-up three. But Curry once noted that people often see the finished product without seeing the repetitions behind it. And that is perhaps the most easily forgotten part of this story. The price is not only a few surgeries or the games spent sitting out. It is years of retraining the body, conditioning sessions no one filmed, thousands of repetitions of the motion, long playoff runs, the returns after injury, and the pressure to keep meeting a standard that he himself helped create. Many years earlier, Curry had stood on one leg in a recovery room, only trying to find stability under his foot again. At that time, he could not know that one day an entire generation would stand farther from the basket because of what he did afterward. Stephen Curry changed the game, but a legacy larger than any three-point record will lie with those who grow up in the world he helped create. They may learn to shoot from deep like Curry. The remaining question is whether they understand that what truly made Stephen Curry was never only the distance of the shot, but the persistence behind every time he had to rebuild himself. If the story of Stephen Curry makes you look at those shots that seem so easy in a different way, please subscribe to the channel so we can continue exploring the people who turned adversity into legacy. Thank you for staying with us to the end of this journey, and see you again in the next video with another story about the price, the persistence, and the strength behind great things.